So recently, the other day, Cyberpunk Jordan did a video asking the question if Ken Penders owns anything when it comes to what occurred about a decade ago today. Tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this, most likely it'll be today, which would be Labor Day. Happy Labor Day to you guys. Um, but he asked he titled his video asking the question if Ken Penders owned anything. And quite honestly, he brought up some good points. He went and cited some information, documentations that Captain AWF, who I guess deactivated their Twitter, had posted, and it's stuff you can actually find online through court sites, legal court sites where you'd have to pay a fee, but you'd be able to get access to um, you'd be able to get access to what you need. You'd be able to look at the records you want to look at to see if maybe there's something there that some people overlooked, some people missed. Well, overlooked and missed is pretty much the same thing, but things that people may have overlooked, missed, may have not mentioned because they didn't want to, stuff like that. And like I said, he cited. Hold on for a sec. Sorry about that, guys. Like I've said before in some videos, it seems my mom has good timing. It's almost like when I start recording, she'll start moving. Like she could be asleep and all of a sudden she wakes up. She's got good timing. I don't know what it is. But anyway, like I said, he cited Captain AWF, who looked up these documents, shared these documents and everything of of the court case that Penders went through with Archie and everything. And it seemed to indicate, and even through a lot of citing and researching that Cyber did, it seems to indicate that Ken may not really own everything at all. That, instead, everything that happened, was a mix-up. Oh, not a mix-up, but was basically, it was a mix-up, it was confusion, convolution. Basically, from what I can tell, Penders took advantage of a situation to where he probably knew, without a shadow of a doubt, he probably knew that he didn't rightfully own any of the works he talked about. He didn't rightfully own them. He just saw an opportunity to be like, well, if I can, take advantage of this confusion, of this convolutedness, this kind of transition that the comic and the company were going through, because the comic was transitioning from him being a head writer to Ian Flynn, and then bringing in other people. So it was they were going through a lot of changes, and Penders probably thought, hey, I could take advantage of this and, kind of reel it into my favor. And I believe, in my opinion, that's what he did. True, he may have done it at the suggestion of his wife after the whole Sonic Chronicles, BioWare, blow up and everything. And, that's believable, if you will. That is kind of believable, but honestly, one could, probably say that, however he went about it, whether he was encouraged by his wife or not, or he just saw an opportunity and took advantage of it, he basically, he, like I just said, he took the opportunity, he took advantage of an opportunity, and he went with it. Whether he was encouraged by his wife or somebody from a legal perspective or whatever, he went with it. He went with it. Now, again, whether or not he was telling the truth in some ways or he was making up stuff, we may never know. But all evidence as of late does point to the fact that maybe he was, as I said earlier, not telling the truth. He was making up stuff, and that he doesn't entirely own, anything, at all. He doesn't own, Hershey the cat. He doesn't own Joffrey St. John. He doesn't own, the Dark Legion. He doesn't own Julie Sue. He doesn't own Scourge, aka Evil Sonic, and so on. He doesn't own them at all, and that they all basically do belong to Sega, and by extension Archie Comics, or they did belong to Archie Comics, but mostly they belong to Sega. But again, why would he do all this? Why would he, knowing that he probably wasn't telling the truth and was making up stuff, why would he take advantage of it? Or why would he go this direction and say, hey, these are my characters and I want royalties and all that? When obviously during his time on the book, he could have asked for that. He could have took Victor Golick aside and said, hey, I want to put this into this contract that I get royalties for the use of my characters even while I'm working on the book and putting them in the stories. I want royalties. He could have done that. He could have talked to Victor Golick, who was in charge of Archie, who was the editor-in-chief of Archie at the time, as long as the representatives of Sega, and said, hey, whenever I write a story for you and I add the characters here, I want royalties. I want royalties. He could have done it then. That way, even when he would leave the book, he would have security knowing that he would, get money in return anytime his characters would be used. But he didn't do that. And all of a sudden, now he wants to ask for royalties for characters that that he's saying he owns just because he created it for a comic that he was freelancing on, or was a writer for hire, if you will. Now he's asking for royalties. To me that never really made sense, and I don't think it made sense to a lot of other people. But again, I think he just, I'm thinking that at the behest of his wife or some kind of friend who was who knew a little bit of the legal system, I'm assuming he, like I said earlier, saw an opportunity to take advantage of a lot of the transitioning going on at Archie to, get things in his favor, even if, he wasn't telling the truth. Because all of a sudden he makes the announcement around this time that he's doing the Lawless Sue Chronicles, which is his take on Mobius years later. And it's like, it's just kind of suspicious, and it's kind of weird, kind of suspicious and weird of the timing. And the only thing I think a lot of us could probably think of is that he needed cash. It's like, now you might say, well, didn't he have money? He wrote for comics. He should be well off. Yeah, he could have been well off, and maybe his wife, had a good job as well. But it takes money but here's the thing, even though you could be good and well off on money, it does take money, if you will, to create something like a comic. And and to me, the ironicness of the timing is, him announcing this, and I think the reason he went with the lawsuit or something, or took Archie to court and everything, is the fact, or was asking for royalties and all that, was because he wanted money for his project. That's what it is. That's why, if you think about it, it's been over a decade since he made that announcement, and the book is still being worked on. The project is still being worked on, and now he wants to explore all these other ventures, involving the characters. And it's like, what's really going on? What's the purpose here, right? And then you hear him, come out and, say he wants to take Paramount, to court for putting Echidna characters in Sonic 2 and all that. And it's like, what is going on here? It's like, what's this man's, purpose? What's this man's reasoning for doing all this? And I think, in my honest opinion, looking back on it, my honest opinion, because I know I've come on here, on numerous occasions, and have kind of defended him in some ways, kind of said, well, he does have his right, and like others have, even Cyberpunk Jordan, even kind took his side a little bit in certain scenarios in his video. But the way I look at it, in my honest opinion, is the reason the Lawless Sue Chronicles have been kind of stop and go throughout the past decade is because he's running out of finances. He doesn't want to use his money, that he has, his own money, to make this project happen. He doesn't want to go to something like Kickstarter or Patreon to make it happen. No, instead, he wants to basically take people to court for the most ridiculous reasons, the most asinine reasons, just so he can get money that way to support his project. That's how I see it. Because again, if he wanted royalties for his characters, he could have easily come up with a deal while he was still on the book to ensure that would happen even after he left. He could get the royalties while he was still on it, as well as he could get them after he left. But he didn't do that. And now, here we are, basically about a decade later, looking back at the reboot that occurred because of the fact that he took, took Archie Comics and vice versa to court due to royalties that he felt he was owed. Now, is Archie innocent in all this? No, they're not innocent, because it is well documented that they could have had, a winning hand in place had they kept their documents, organizedly filed correctly. If they could have had a winning hand in place if they would have kept their files of every contract, freelance or not, that people that wrote for the comics signed. They would have had a winning hand, in place had they put that the contract that Ken had signed, had they put it in an organized, correct manner that they could rely on, just in case they needed some kind of evidence. But they didn't do that. And it, to me, it really hurt Archie Comics when they went to court. And the judge even was like, yeah, this is ridiculous, this is dumb, this is a fine mess you guys got yourself into, or as Lankara would call it, a 10-car pileup of a mess. But yeah, Archie's not innocent either. They're not innocent in all this, because again, if they would have had all the cards in place, everything organized properly and correctly, they could have avoided this. They could have. But because they didn't, Ken, once again, like I said earlier, took advantage of a situation, that he saw, favored him. Because again, like I said, he knew, probably by word of mouth, that Archie Comics was going through a transition behind the scenes with all the staff and all the comic book writers for all the books, licensed or not. He probably heard, by word of mouth that was happening, saw an opportunity by the suggestion of his wife or somebody that, was a good friend of his that knew about the legal system. And he took the advice and, basically seized the opportunity to essentially, ask for his royalties, or basically sue the company for not giving him his royalties. And, when Archie Comics countersued him, took him to court and said, okay, we're going to prove you wrong, but they couldn't, put the evidence up. Again, Ken saw an opportunity. Because, Archie Comics did present the document, even though it was photographed. But what did Ken do? Ken, obviously knowing somebody that knew about the legal system, took advantage of the opportunity and said, well, yeah, they do have proof of the document, but according to this, your law states they have to have the actual physical document in hand and not something photographed, because it could be fraudulent, or it could be posed as fraudulent, if you will. So he saw opportunities. He basically was able to checkmate where he could, his way to victory. But now, throughout these past several years, again, like I said, we're hearing all these reports of the fact that Ken Penders may have not really told the truth. And you have people like Captain AWF that Cyberpunk Jordan cited, showcasing these documents and saying, hey, look, Ken may have not been telling the truth the entire time. And then when you take some of what Ken, said in account over the past several years, yeah, somewhere in the middle there is the truth. And what that truth is Ken didn't really have the right to basically sue or countersue Archie for the royalties and the ownership of his characters. He didn't. He didn't have any right because he had no real proof. He just made stuff up and took advantage of a certain transitional period at that time and other situations he saw thanks to advice from his wife and someone that he probably knew, someone close to him that knew the legal system. He just saw an opportunity. Well, like I said, he checkmated his way very, very swervily, if you will, to victory. He checkmated his way very swervily to victory. But now, years later, all this evidence all this information, documentation, if you will, that, as I said earlier, and even Cyberpunk Jordan pointed out, could cost you a pretty penny to just get access to, is all this documentation coming out, court documentation, is being revealed and showcased that Penders may have not been totally true in what he was saying. About, oh, I own Hershey the cat, I own Julie Sue, I own Scourge, I own this, I own that. He wasn't being entirely true. And what's crazy about this is that I think what's crazy about this is Ken could try to take companies like Paramount, to court. He could try to take Sega back to court to what's the word I'm looking for? To revisit his case with them as far as Chronicles and most of the ownership of the Archie Sonic characters go. He could retake them to court and to revisit that and try to prove he owns all that, or try to prove he was suckered and whatever, or try to prove Paramount took his ideas. But I think this time around, if he was to do something like that, he would lose. He would lose because the judge, I have no doubt, would hear through the grapevine, and maybe through some cited research, the judge would hear about all these other previous cases that he was part of. Well, they probably have a history of it. And they'd probably point out a lot of the flaws in what he's trying to, and what he'd be trying to bring up, if he wanted to, take this back to court and everything. If somebody like Sega, like, let's say, IDW, if they wanted to reprint all the Archie books like they've done with other licensed comics they got the license from Archie and such, like TMNT, the judge would basically not show him any favoritism, because they would point out the fact that, he said all this stuff, but that he also later on admitted that some of it wasn't true. Now, I'm not saying Ken Penders won't do that, because if he was going to do that, he would have already done that with Paramount. But I think the reason he doesn't want to go to court anymore, or take anybody to court, period, is the fact that he knows everybody's pointing out all this evidence that shows that he may have made all that stuff up over a decade ago and everything, and that he wouldn't have no real proof to back him up, even if he tried to go to court against Paramount, or even if he tried to go back to court with Sega, or even IDW, if IDW, like I said, wanted to republish in trade paperbacks the entire Archie Sonic collection, all the issues, if you will, including the spin-offs. He knows he wouldn't have a foot to stand on, because there's too much evidence out there now that says, hey, Ken Penders, you lied about everything in the previous court cases, so how can we believe you now? And how do we know you're not lying to us now? And again, I believe this all centers back, in my opinion, to the fact that when he first went through this over a decade ago, to claim ownership, which caused the reboot to happen and everything, that was around the same time he introduced and started working on his Lawless Zoo Chronicles, his take on Mobius years later. And again, the timing is so ironic, as to, when he announced that, because that's when he was going through this legal battle with Sega, this legal battle with Archie and everything, which, with Archie-wise, he did win, kind of. So he was going through all this, and he ended up not only getting ownership of his characters, but I think he got something in damages as well, financially. So again, the timing was kind of weird that he's suddenly doing this. He was suddenly, no, not suddenly doing, okay, let me rewind to, all right. What I'm trying to say is the timing is so kind of ironic that, all of a sudden he introduces his take on Mobius years later, the thing he created called that he's now calling the Lawsuit Chronicles. The timing is kind of weird that he's presenting this at the same time this lawsuit's going on that causes the reboot to occur. So I think in the long run, all it really was, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think in the long run, all it really was with Penders, if what people are saying is true, and there's a lot of evidence that proves that, him lying possibly about ownership and all that of the characters, is true, that, basically he doesn't own them, I should say. I think in the long run, what this really was, since the beginning, and even up to now, especially with, like I said, him wanting to do the same thing with Paramount and all that for the most ridiculous of reasons. And, you kind of look at the fact that his Lawsuit Chronicles is still in development. It's kind of stop and go in the past decade, when something like that should have been done, not even a year or two after, or maybe 2 years after the lawsuit. I think it's all about money. That's what it is. It's money. Because, again, like I said, you need money for these kind of projects, especially if he wants to turn the Lawsuit Chronicles into something more than a comic. He wants to turn it into a movie, a show, or whatever. And it takes money to do so. So I think, honestly, that's what these lawsuits are really about. Him just wanting an easier way to get money instead of doing a Kickstart or a Patreon, which I think would be more beneficial for him. And that's why I believe he did what he did a little over a decade ago, with Archie and all them. And what he's trying to do with Paramount and all that, it's all about money. Because again, the timing, kind of syncs up, especially when you look at the fact that throughout this decade, a project that should have been done maybe 2 or 3 years after the lawsuit is still being developed in a stop and go kind of scenario. So yeah, I do agree. I don't really think he owns anything. I think all he really wanted was money, and he didn't want to use his own money, or maybe his wife prohibited him from using their money to make this project a reality, and he didn't want to use his own money, so he wanted to try to find another way to do it. In other words, I think Ken Penders, my opinion, he scammed Archie Comics, conned them and Sega and the fans out of a lot of great characters, just because he wanted money for his project. A project that is still in development and should have been done 2 to 3 years after. So, that's just my opinion. I think it was really about money. Now, he could probably deny it all he wants, but I think that's the truth. I think it is. So I do believe, honestly, like Cyberpunk Jordan, he doesn't own anything. He doesn't. But here's the sad truth. But here's the sad part about that. We may never know the truth. The only way we're going to pretty much know the truth, of the fact that, as we pretty much have figured out, piecing all the parts together, that he was lying, the only way we're going to know that is when IDW, someday down the line, announces they're going to be releasing trade paperback volumes of the Archie Sonic comic book, just like they did with the Archie TMNT comic book. And if that day happens, and part of that collection includes a lot of the stories Ken created with his characters included in them, then we'll know he was lying. And there's nothing he can really do about it. But again, I think in the long run, it was always just really about money. Money for his Lawless Sue pet project that he has yet to finish. And that's just my opinion on it. Because again, I think in the long run, as hard as it is to say, I think he scammed people. I think he scammed and conned Archie Comics. I think he scammed and conned, the fans. He scammed and conned Sega into, you know, and most importantly, believe it or not, he did something that was, you know, probably very rare to do, but maybe not. He scammed and conned the justice system, you know, the courts. He did that. And by doing so, he got what he wanted. But now, I don't think if he was to go back to court to try to prove, hey, you know, what I've said in the past is true, I don't think the courts are going to fall for it. I think they've smartened up, hopefully, and they'll realize, yeah, Ken, we don't believe you. In fact, if anything, you owe Sega money. You owe Archie Comics money. You owe these fans an apology for what you did, for lying. So that's just how I see it. That's how I see it. See it basically. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Comment down below. I do apologize if I was kind of stuttery, a little ramblish here. It's late. I'm kind of tired and everything. It's midnight, you know, now. Basically, it's Labor Day weekend and everything as I'm closing this out. But yeah, I do apologize for that. But let me know what your thoughts are. Comment down below, like, share during the premiere. You will get a podcast version of this at BW Rose's Discussions Podcast and all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. But more specifically, you can listen and watch it on Spotify. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are, and I do recommend checking out Cyberpunk Jordan's a video on it. It's very insightful, you know, and everything. Like I said, he cites Captain AWF and what they brought up and all that. So, yeah, you know, give me your thoughts, guys. You know, give me your thoughts and all that. You know, do you think I'm onto something here, or do you think maybe I'm missing some details, or do you think maybe, you know, people like me and Cyber were just grasping for straws? Let me know down below in the comments. And until then, I will talk to you all later.